Dr. Helen Gomor. This is a quick primer on hilchos of kashering. Someone buys tashmish for goy. If it's dvarim shaloi nishtamish behen, if it's brand new kelim, so then all you need to do is matbilan, you toivel them, him tahirin. What if it's dvarim shenistamish behen? So if it's alidei tzainin, you only use it for cold. You go in kaisais, vikasanios, it's luchios, cups, goblets, other types of things that you use for cold. Madichan, all you need to do is give them a quick rinse out. That takes out any bleeds of iser. Matbilan is for the tefillah. Then the tahir, then you can use them. What about dvarim shenistamish ben aidei chamen? If it was used with heat, like pots that you cooked in, good hayoros, v'hakum kamusim, which is like a chiding that heats up water, umachame chamen, and other kalim that warm up the water. Magilon, you have to make hagola, umatbilon, then you toivel them, veim toyer. What about dvarim shenistamish ben aidei ha'over? What about utensils that were used directly in fire? Kigoyin, hashpudin, like a spit, vaskalois, and like a barbecue grill. Melabnon, on those you have to make libon, umatbilon, and you toivel them, veheim toyerin, and then they'll be toyer. V'chulon, shenistamish ben ad shelo yapil, v'shelo yapil, v'shelo yilabim. What if you cooked on one of these items and you didn't kasher it? What is the halacha with the food? Tanich had also. We have one Tana who holds that the food's also. The Tanich idich mutter. So we have the machloikis if the blios the blios that come out of these goyish kelim, meaning treif in the blios, will they answer the food that they got mixed into? Is it a stira? Is it a machloikis tanaim? Is it a loikash? It's not. Oh, yes, it is. It's not a stira, rather it's a machloikis. Ha command the amr nois and tam of kam also. The Brisa that says it's usher holds noise and tam of kam usher, even though the blios that are in the walls of these kalim are old and they're noise and tam of kam, nevertheless they still usher. Noise and tam of kam mutter. And we paskin the Tanya Idich says that once the blios are a day old, the Tosfos is a discussion if it's 24 hours or if it's just overnight, but they're pogim, and therefore if they go into food that you cook with these kalim, it will not usher. If you hold nois and tam of kam is mutter, which is what we hold, why did the Torah make such a big deal about the kelim of Midian to kasher them? Why kasher them? They couldn't have caused any iser because it was already nois and tam of kam. You know what type of kelim the Torah was referring to, where it said you need to kasher the clay Midian? Those were only if they were cooked in that day, because that's the lav nois and tam of gamu. Gemara. So instead of kashering, all they would have had to do was wait a day, and then it'll become pogum, and there's no problem. Because they history, Gemara, no. Zara kedera she'ena b'shem mishum kedera b'shem. All of the kederas had to be kashered because of a gzera. If we would let you use without kashering a kedera b'shem, a kedera that's not b'shem, people would get confused, and they might even use a kedera that's bas shema, where the belias are not nois and tam of kam. That would be a real problem. Okay, what if the old nois and tam of kam is also I maybe the Torah only required kashering on a keli that was bas shema. The Shita who holds that nois and tam of kam is also holds even brand new kalim. I'm sorry, not brand new. Even kalim that were just cooked in today, the blias are also pogim. Once it's a blia, it's pogim, and nevertheless, the Torah said you have to kasher it. So you see that even nois and tam of kam has to be kasher. The final stretch of Maseches Avoda Zara. Rambam of Amram Rav Sheshes. Rav Amram asked the kasher to Rav Sheshes. Then we learned hashvudin spits, askala, and grills. How do you kasher them? Milav non ba'or. You have to make them white in fire. We learned by kochim. Now by kochim, they always had to constantly kasher the metal kalim because there was always noiser in them. If you cooked a piece of kochim in a keli today, tomorrow that's going to be noiser. So we learned by kochim hashvud va'askala. How do you kasher a spit or a grill? Magilon bechamin. You only make hagola. That's not consistent with what how we kasher these items. We only need libun. So why is it that by kachim you don't need the same level of kashering as you require for isurim? Amram, my son said, his son said, Ma inin kachim etzel gi'ulu ovid kechov. Why are you comparing the two? Haka haterabal. The kachim, when they were berleya, the beliefs of kachim, the beliefs that it was berleya was not osir, it wasn't nicer yet. It was still regular good kachim. But Hasam, when you're talking about buying kalim that belong to a guy, isurabal. When the beliefs went into the kalim, they were osir already. Amarava, I don't get it. Why should that make a difference? Soif kikapolit isurkapol. What's the difference if the beliefs were mutter or osir at the time that they went into the keli? We're concerned about using the keli now and the beliefs coming out. Regardless, those beliefs are osir. El amarava, my hagolanami shtifa umerika. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we discussed the makar of plunging the keli into cold water, because it says in the pasuk umurak v'shotaf b'mayim. Let's look at Rashi. Let's look at the pasuk. I mean, uchli cheres asher tevashel boy, a kli cheres that you cooked kachim in yishaver, you have to break it. You can't kasher it. But if the kachim were cooked in a klina chayshes, which can be kashered, umayrak v'shutaf b'mayim. What does umayrak v'shutaf b'mayim means? Zokt Rabba Achidish. What does it? Hagala mean? Shtifa Marika. So it's not referring to the kashering process. The Hagala that's mentioned in the Brisa means after you kashered it with a proper libun, because we know grills and spits you have to use libun for in order to be mekayim the umayrak or shutaf b'mayim. That's what the Brisa means when it says that hashpud v'askala magilon. It means after you kasher them with libun, then magilon. Amalei, you cannot say that. Midami, Merika Ushtifa B'Tzainim. We know the plunging into water that the pasuk lists is referring to cold water, but the Brisa uses a lashon of Hagola. It says Magilon B'Chamin, Hagola B'Chamin. So you cannot say that what the Brisa means when it says Magilon B'Chamin, it means the Umerik Ushutaf B'Mayim, which is post kashering. Ella Amar Abaye Yagid Olav Reya. You have two halachas that are similar. The halacha by us, by Geula Nachrim, and the halacha by Kachim. Let's say each one reveals and teaches us something about the other. Yagid al-Reya, Tana Hacha Libun, by Geula Nachrim it says you need Libun, but for who adin Hagala, you would need Hagala as well. So anytime you kasher something that's used in the fire, you need two processes. You need Sai Libun and Sai Hagala. And Tanahasam Hagala, who adin Libun. And over there, although by Kachim the Mishnah only mentions Hagala, but of course it also needs Libun, just like we know by Gulina. Amalei Rava, whenever you have a case of Yagid al Avrei, when one Mishnah is clear and the other Mishnah is vague, you need to have, at least in one place, the whole picture becomes visible. So Amalei Rava Ihachi Lisninu Lechulu Bechada, either by Kachim or by Gulei Nochem, it should have said that you require both Libun and Hagala. That will be crystal clear that you need both. And then the listing, I'm sorry? Every time you kasher something that needs Libun. As a shpud and an askala, in order to kasher, you would need Sai Libun and Sai Hagala. So effectively more and then the listing Chadabedach Achriti. If one, that's why Kachim it said you need both. And by Gulach said you only need one, I would agree with you. You can say Yagid al Vreya. Because one doesn't list both, one lists both. But here, where it lists one by one by the other, maybe that's because that's halacha. Maybe Kachim only need Hagala, and maybe Gulei Nachem require Libun. El Amarava Al Tayupshan. Kachim Hanyu Tamayu. You know why by Kachim you don't need Libun. You don't need the same level of intensity in your kashrus process. Rather than Libun, you can get away with a lighter Hagala. It's Kedar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua. Like Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua taught us. The Yomari said, Kol Yoim Nasa Gil L'Chaveret. Every day there's Hagala made, because you cook in the pot today, but you're going to cook in the pot tomorrow. So every day there's Hagala, so there's no problem. because the Easter never remains in the pot. Frankly, that doesn't make any sense. Teinach shlomim. I could understand if someone cooked the shlomim on Monday, so the bliss of the shlomim, even on Tuesday, are still mutter. The kivon de l'shnei yomim masachli. If you cook now on Tuesday another carbon, it'll put the new carbon's taste into the pot and take the shlomim, which is still heter, because shlomim you can eat for 2 days. It'll take it out of the pot. So teinich shlomim the chivud l'shnei yomim misachli mekami did have a noiser kahavagil before it becomes noiser. The hagol is made because you were already cooking it in it the next day on Tuesday. But what if you cooked achatos on Monday? What are you going to do then? Elachatos kivin de liyoyim v'layla masachla. The chatos that you cooked on Monday is now noiser on Tuesday. Ki mevashel b'ha'idna chatos. If you try to cook another chatos on Tuesday, will have a noiser. It will be noiser. Ki had the mevashel l'machar. I'm sorry. Ki mevashel idna chatos have a noiser. If you cook on Monday a chatos, Tuesday morning the bliss are going to be noiser. And it doesn't matter what you cook there, but there's already bliss of iser of chatos of noiser. Kapolit noiser the chatos. Do idna bechatos of shlomim do lamacha. Monday's bliss of chatos are now going to be released into the pot of chatos or shlomim that you're cooking in it on Tuesday. So we have a problem. How does that work? Amri lo tzricha. They did it very clever, and this is what they did. The kimevashel b'chatos ha'idna. No matter how many chatois they would cook in a pot in the base of mikdash, they made sure that the last thing that was cooked in the pot every day was a shlamim. So now, every day, all of the bliss of any chatois that got into this pot were removed because of the shlamim. Now the pot only has bliss of shlamim, which will not become noiser tomorrow. So therefore, the chimevashel b'ha'idna hadar mevashel b'ha'idna shlamim, and therefore the chatos to lamachar ushlamim the esmal, and tomorrow, yes, they'll start cooking chatois in the same pot, but this pot now only has bliss of shlamim, which will be mutter. So the chatos to lamachar ushlamim the esmal v'hadi adadi kashalom zmunayu. They both expire at the same time. And then at the end of the day tomorrow, while there's still no noisar, and then you'll cook again shlamim. So every day, the last thing you cook will be shlamim, and therefore it'll always be matter all the blias that were there until now, and it extends the deadline to tomorrow night. So tomorrow, if that's what's happening, then the Mishnah says you need to do kasher, you need to do hagala. What you're saying is it's a self-extending. It's a self-perpetuating sequence. So you never need to kasher at all. So you have that kasher. But we've worked it out how with Hagala alone there wouldn't be a problem. Rav Papa says there's another very big difference. High curd, high low curd. If you have a pot of kachim, which you use every single day, then the blias in it never harden and stay there very, very tightly. Rather, they're always loose and they flow out easily. So therefore, it doesn't take a special agola. The cooking one will take out the previous belia. But the treif and the blias that are in the pot from a goy, he could use the pot once a month. He could use it once a year. You don't know how long and hardened the blias are, and it'll take a much stronger kasher. So let's see Rashi. Rabashi Maikar Hailoikar. Loilam bekachim isurapol. So we're not going with Rambam's teretz. We're talking about not using a shlamim at the end of the day every day. No, rather every day it's noiser. So why is it the bekashalo liboy libon? You can ask me a question. If these are all grills and spits, how can you get away with hagala? You should require libon like our Mishnah requires libon for anything that you roast. The gil ovid kechavim adi deloy mevashalu kol shaita. A regular homeowner's pot, you don't use every day. It's used from time to time. And therefore, umiskasha hablia b'soichoy, the blia gets very hard inside. V'nidbekes boy b'chula tarshirish b'las. It gets stuck in. Ve'ein noyach lifloit b'hagala achem labdebo. The Hagala won't work anymore. You need libun. I will be coaching. The kol shaitim avashaluhu. It's a very active pot. The beliefs remain fluid, like corid, and therefore v'noyach halufloit hilchach v'hagala kapala. So that's the second teretz of why we're more makel with kachim. Ravash Yamar la'olim kidamar merkar, like our very first shot, and that was that hacha heterabala. By kachim, when the beliefs go in, it's heter, and hacha isurabala. But the beliefs of gilui nochim, when they go into the pot, are also. Udikakashalach. You asked me kashi on that. Who cares the condition of the beliefs when they go in? Right now, on the second day, where you want to use the pot, the beliefs are coming out. Udikashalach, the kapalit, isura kapalit. That's not fair. You know why? Because ba'idna the kapalit loy isa liisura be'ene. When it's being pilot, there is no more isur be'en. And therefore, by kachim we're more equal, because isur never went in, and even the isur that's coming out is not be'en. Masha'en kain by gilui nochim, the isur when it went in, it was be'en. That's worse. So if when the isur goes in, it's be'en, then you need libun. But if when the isur went in, it was no. If when the isur went in, it wasn't be'en, and now that the isur is coming out, it's not be'en either. There you could be mekel, and it'll be enough to do a goal. So at the end of the day, we have three shotim as to why by kachim you can get away with hagala, either because it's a self-perpetuating process. The hagala, the built-in hagala always comes because every day you cook a shlomim in the pot, a last item, or the svara is the reason why you can get away with hagala, even on something that would normally require libun by kachim, is because these pots are very fluid, they're constantly cooking in them. Or the third shot is that there was never isser that when the bleas went into the pot, it was not isser by kachim, and when the bleas come out of the pot, they're not be'en, and therefore it's less chum. Zokt Gemara weiter. Yad kama melabda. What is the shear of libun? How much do you have to heat them up in a flame with a torch to make it kosher? Amar of mani ad shetasher klipasam. The metal has to get so hot that actually a layer falls off. A layer of the metal actually falls off. That's how you make hagala. The chaytet magilam. And how do you do hagala? Amar Avuna yoyrek tana b'soich yoyrek gedoy. Like we do over here in shul. Shul cooks up a big, massive pot of hot water, and everyone throws their little items into it. So the first question is, you don't have to make hagala to the point that a layer of metal peels off. Why do you need to do such a high level by libun? I'm sorry? In sparks. So Rav Moshe says that libun doesn't work like hagala. Hagala takes the blias out. Libun burns them up. So therefore, since libun is not getting the blias out, therefore we need to make it so hot to make sure that they're all completely burnt to a crisp. That's why by libun it requires that sparks come out, not by hagala. That's what we're about to get to that. So, you gave us a perfect eitzah. How do you get the small pot kasher to put it into a bigger pot? But what about the biggest pot you have? How are you going to kasher that? Tashma, the hu duda. There was a huge pot. The havoi beir of Akavia. Akavia had it. And what did he do? There was no bigger pot where he could put it into. So you know what he did? A hadrulei gedafna. He built a little rim on the outside of the pot, the lisha of dough, apume. So around the outside of the barrel, he made a little rim that he raised up so that if water would overflow, it would still be sitting there against the rim. As Rashi's Kadesha the Kabel Mayim Harbe, the Yavru Aroish Chosvasa. He wants that the top surface of the pot should also be exposed to the Hagala. But normally, the top of the pot, once the water gets above the top of the pot, it flows over. So how do you do that? So he created a higher barrier so that Umal Yua Maya, he filled the whole thing up with water, and he heated it up. Amar Rabba commented, Man chachim lemevat ki hamilsa ilav Rabba Kavya. Who would have thought of such an unbelievable, great idea like Rabba Kavya did? The Gavar Rabbu, because he is a Gavar Rabbu. We already know what Pshat Gavar Rabbu is. Kasavar, he holds kaboyle kach poelta. Never was the outer rim of a pot immersed in hot water. So it never was Baileya that way. How would it have been Baileya if little driplets splashed out of the pot here and there? So therefore, Ma Boiloi Binitzaitis. Just like when it was Baileya, it was only with little drops that splattered out of the pot. Apolta Binitzaitis. So Zot Rashi, Ma Boiloi Binitzaitis, Lav Boiloi, Ela Al Yidei Nitzaitis, Shenitas or Resichasham. The only way on the outer edge of the pot it could have been Baileya anything is if some spray, there was some overspray. But bishas blias iser. It didn't go into another pot bishas blias iser. So there were kach bishas plita avapi shaloyich niso techyar acheres. In other words, the way this pot became usher is not because you cooked it in another bigger pot with iser. There was just spray on it. So too, to kasher it, you don't have to put it into another pot. You can just put it into a scenario where it gets sprayed on, and therefore hoil bin is samala, yafa, since it's full up to the top. Umayla the choices at svasa pilot, and the water will overflow the rim and be held on it because of his secondary rim, his secondary temporary rim that he built. Therefore, it will work. Frank Rashi, so why do you need that? Every pot, when you cook with it and it's boilay isser, you don't have the secondary rim. Why do you need a secondary rim to kasher? When you got fana be'inin, you need a secondary rim. Mishum the loy hava hachi. If you didn't have that rim, dilma loy hava masket choices ala sofa behazimna. Not every single time that it's sprayed. Over time, every pot has to be kashered because eventually something probably sprayed on it. But when you try to kasher it, lav dafka, you guarantee there's going to be that overspray at that time. But since you used a pot many times, it was a goyish pot. At least once it might have happened. Therefore, we have to kasher that as well and take it out. So it seems like he built a little rim around it out of dough. This way, he was able to slightly overflow the pot, and the top surface of the pot would have gotten hagala, and that's what seems to be the concern that we have. We just make it overflow. But I guess that's the same thing. They didn't want to spill, so they made a secondary rim. But if you let the whole pot overflow on itself, it should be the same thing, I assume. Hasakin, how do you kasher a knife? Shafa, you rub it, vihi tahira, and it becomes tahir. You can use it. Let's just have a look at Tosfos. Shafa, what does it mean? V'noyatza eser pa'amim b'kar. You just plunge it into the earth 10 times. Yerushalmi kama sholosh pa'amim. Yerushalmi says you only need to do it 3 times. Mash with the hakal lav dafka eser pa'amim. It's mash when it says 10 here, it's lav dafka 10, which means several times to clean it well. Miyumi to come in the kaman dotza eser pa'amim b'karka. Mash the dafka hammer. The ish lahachmer. Thereby Tosfos says when you kasher a knife, plunge it in 10 times into the ground. So we're going to see in a second that this works only for tzoinin. If you're using the knife only for tzoinin, so then this will clean it off well. You can't just rinse. But for hot, you have to hagala. Hagala will for sure work. Hagala is more chomer. Amar Avuka Bachama v'noyatza asar pam b'karka. Amar Avoda b'reja v'shua u'b'karka she'ein Avoda. It cannot be soft soil that was already worked with. It has to be rough soil, so that it's abrasive and it takes off the belias. Amar of Kahana, u'b'sakin yofa she'ein b'gumis. This also only works if it's a very smooth knife that doesn't have jagged edges on it. Because if it has jagged edges, there's stuff that's going to get stuck in between those ridges, and that won't come off by plunging it into the earth 10 times. Rasha's huadin, rubbing it with a sandcloth. Sakin yofa she'ein bagumois, there noyatza asor pam b'karka. And I'm Ravunim B'reid Rav Yeshua, that's dafka lechal b'tzoyin. That's only lechal b'tzoyin. So you might want to ask, if it's just turning, why not just rinse it off? Why do you have to do this extra thing? The teretz is a knife is used by putting pressure on things. That could cause it to stick better. Therefore, standard rinsing wouldn't be enough. But this only works lechal b'tzoyin. Yehada Yehuda Ubati Bartuvi. So before we get to this story, I just want to quickly take a peek at Tosfos. Tosfos has a discussion what's the difference between a small knife and a big knife, because the Yerushalmi makes a distinction between a small knife and a big knife. So let's just go to Tosfos' Maskana, where Tosfos brings from Rabbeinu Baruch. Here, oh, here it is. See, it says here. So here I'm going on the third wide line of Tosfos. Mufarsha b'chodin Yerushalmi kenu hadu the tema b'sakin cotton. A small knife, she'ein regilos liish b'gumos. Smaller knives tend not to have jagged edges, and therefore be'ein belua b'gumos, and therefore we don't have to worry about anything in the gumos, and therefore b'sagi b'ni'itz his karka. Avol sakin gadol, but a long big knife, shederech liish b'gumos, which often is made with jagged edges, there tzricha libun. There, even Hagala wouldn't be enough. There, Liban is required. The benoyatza bekarka ene moyo l'shavshef ulahaver isra nidbak begumos. Even if you put it into an abrasive karka, it won't get all of the shanunas and isra that's in between the ridges of the knife. Only Liban would work. And such a knife, even if you want to use it only for cold, you still need Liban because we're not worried about blias. We're worried about mamashus itself. Why? Mishum delay mahani hagala el lahaflit ha'isur habalua b'soich hasakin. Hagala only helps to take out blias. Avaloi mahani laver isur nidbuk. It does not help to take out isur be'en that's stuck to the outside surface of the knife. Vashivshiv bekarka mahani lahaver isur nidbuk. Putting it in the ground, that will scrape off some of the isur nidbuk, but that's only if it's smooth. But the chivin sheish gumois ein takana lahaver isra nidbak. There's nothing you could do to get rid of that isra rak al yidei, which is how we paskin. A knife with a jagged edge you could only fix with libun. So before I go to the next gemara, I want to share a story. You know what grabs your attention when your audio senses clash with your visual senses. When you see two things that don't match. So there was a very big gvir in Los Angeles. The Alta Ingrid Shahid, multi-millionaire. His name is on a lot of the buildings of the Yiddish Moistus there. And what happened is his wife was Nefteris Rachman al, and he married a hot young woman who literally dressed like a hooker. There's no other way to describe it. She was dressed very non-sneistic. And I was once with my wife when I was a young man shopping in Ralph's, which is the main grocery store like Metro, and he's there with his wife. So it was a very funny scene because most Heimish people would have been embarrassed to be seen, walking with this woman. But he's with this woman, and they're shopping. So she picked up a product from the shelf and she put it into their cart. And he says, "What's the mitzvah? If I dich nicht to owe you, this can Heimish extra. Ins Essen nicht owe you." So I just thought that was like the funniest thing because look where you're standing there, and now you're worried about the OU. So let's look at this story. Yehuda ubati bartuvi. Mar Yehuda and Bati Bartuvi were both Amiroyim, have a Yosy kamedish Shvar Malka. They were sitting in front of Shvar Malka, a goy, and Aisu lekamayu esroy. They brought an esrog, and Shvar Malka was sitting there with his knife. Pasak, he cut off a piece of the esrog. Ochel only ate it. Then Pasak, he cut off another piece of the esrog. V'havlei lebati Bartuvi. He gave it to Bati Bartuvi, cut it with a goyish knife. And the Hadar Dotza Asara Zimni Ba'ara. Then Shvar Malka, out of respect for Rabbi Yehuda, wouldn't want to serve him something that he cut with a non-kosher knife, so he koshered his own knife by sticking it into the ground 10 times. Pazak, now he cut another piece of esrog, Havle Lemar Yehuda. He gave it to Rabbi Yehuda. Amrle Bati Bartuvi. So Bati Bartuvi told Shvar Malka, who gavra lav by Yisraelu? What am I? Chopped liver? I'm also Jewish. How come you weren't worried about koshering the knife for me? So Shvar Malka says, I know what you did last night. Omar li mar kimli begavei. He said, Rabbi Yehuda, I know Rabbi Yehuda. I know he's another chashavat Yerei Shemayim. So for him, I have to be extra careful. Umar lo kimli begavei. But I don't know you so well. I didn't know you were so makri. So that's one shot. But the other shot is, we'll have to finish off the Masechta by the Siyum. But he said, I know what you did last night. And Rashi tells us that what they used to do is they used to provide escort services to their guests. That's part of the Hachnosas Orchim. And Rabbi Yehuda, of course, refused that service while you eagerly accepted the service. So you're allowed to have my esrog that I cut with my knife. But Lamaisa, he was in the Moriah, how you talking? So Zok Toisvis, The last toys was Itker Ma the Abdus Burta, Pisha Kuntra Shigar Lahem, Stay Shvachis. Rabbi Yehuda loy Kibla, Ubati Kibla. V'nir Batabasen. Bati didn't do anything wrong. Shadayin Hoya Evet Ksash, Shemu Ukav get Shichar. Bati was still an Evet because his Odin didn't give him a get Shichar. So even though he wasn't working for his Odin, he acted as if he was free and the Odin wasn't being mishabed with him, but technically he still had the halacha of an Evet. Kedemim Perkasar Yochsin, Bati Bartuvi, Baramas Ruche lo Shokol, Baramas Ruche lo Shokol, Gita de Cherus. I guess he was a Balgai, I don't know what it was, but he refused to accept a get Cherus. So therefore, since he technically an Eved, it would have been mutter. Okay? Baruch Hashem, we're to finish Meseches Avoda Zara almost, and let's quickly take a little peek, at least a mission in Hariyos. Hariyos is Hariyos, which means Piskei Halacha, which means Bezdin's Piskei Halacha when they make a mistake, and how that impacts things. We know if someone by mistake, I'm sorry. We know if someone by mistake eats chayla, thinking that it's shuman, he has to bring a chatos. But what if the bezdin paskin is allowed to eat it? What does he do then? So let's have a quick peek at the Mishnah. Haru bezdin lavor al achas mikol mitzvos hamur shpotar. Let's say bezdin paskin you're allowed to eat chayla. They mistakenly paskin that you're allowed to eat chayla. We know if Roiv Tzibur was over, then they bring a Par Hel and Davishal Tzibur. There's a communal carbon that's brought. But here, only one person was over based on the Psak of Bezdin that they issued. And he ate Chaylev because he was relying on the Psak Halacha that they issued. Say if all of Klal Yisrael or Bezdin ate Rashi's Bezdin. Say if Bezdin also were Oimav, not only did they pass in Chelev's mutter, they also ate Chelev, and he ate with them. Ben she'asu v'azacharein, or they ate Chelev, and he at a later date ate Chelev. He didn't eat together with them. Or Ben she'loy also, even if they didn't even act on their own psak, but v'asa, only he ate Chelev based on their psak. The loch is potter. He will be potter. He doesn't have to bring a private carbon chatos. Why doesn't he have to bring a private carbon chatos? Because he only was over, not because of his own mistake, he was completely reliant on the psak of Bezdin and the Asal PM. What about Haru Bezdin? Bezdin made a psak, they passed that Chelev was mutter. But the Yoda Echad Ben Shato, one of the members of the Bezdin knew that this was a mistake. Or Talmud, or there was a Talmud who royal hira, and he was on the level that he could have paskin. Rashi is Talmud royal hira. I'm sorry, Rashi's commenting on something else. And then this Talmud, or one member of the Bezdin, the Halach, the also al pihem, and due to the psak of Bezdin, he went and ate chaylev. Ben she'asu v'asa yimayan, ben she'asu v'asa achrein, ben she'loy asu v'asa harei zachai. There he's chayiv. Mipnei she'loy tell him a Bezdin. Clearly, he wasn't relying on Bezdin because he knew that Bezdin's psak was usher. So the only time you're part of a minhag carbon chatos is if you did what you did because you were reliant on the Bezdin. Zaklal ha'toila ba'atzmei chayiv ha'toila Bezdin potter. Okay, we'll stop here, and Be'ez Hashem we will mamshech tomorrow. Mazel tov, mazel tov. We finished our Avoda Zara. The summer is over. The Avoda Zara is over. Now we got to get back to Hariyos.